Welcome back to Game Development with Pygame. This is part 7 of our tile-based game, and in this episode we're going to add mobs, some zombies, to chase our player around. Alright, in the last video we made our character be able to run around the screen using the arrow keys to turn and the up arrow to move forward, and we can also walk backwards. And we can run around our map colliding with the walls, and it's all working good. It's nice and responsive. And I think for the next step, the first thing we're going to do is just make this look a little better. The grid is a little distracting to look at right now, so let's paint the ground and let's change the walls and just use some placeholder graphics for the walls that'll make them a little more interesting than this plain old filled green square. Alright, and also when I mentioned that it's responsive, something that you run into a lot when you're building a game is you start adding features and you add things and you add things, and then suddenly things start getting slow. And it's a really good idea to keep an eye on while you're developing, keep an eye on how the performance is going. And one way you can do that is to just keep track of your FPS. So what I like to do is just in my loop, and we'll stick it in the draw section, just for a while we're developing. You're going to take this out when you're done. We're just going to set the caption of the window to be the frame rate. Now the frame rate is going to be a decimal number. So we want to format this so we don't have to see, 80 digits after the decimal point. And then so we're going to format that to be just 2 digits. And the command to get the FPS is get FPS. All right, so that lets us just keep track as we're running and see that we are averaging around 60 frames per second still, which is good. That's what we want to see. And we can see that if we add a feature and it suddenly starts dropping that, then we'll at least have an idea what to look at the beginning before we get fancier with optimizing and everything like that. All right, so let's do the graphics. So I'm going to go over here to my settings file. And just like we're listing what image we're going to use for the player, I'm just going to keep all of this stuff in the same kind of format. We're going to say the wall image is going to be tile green 39.png. And what's that? Well, that's just a picture I went and found. I'll show you what it looks like. It's just a little square. I think it's from the Kenny puzzle pack for making puzzle games and things, but this will look nice and at least look better than our plain green squares. But what you'll notice is that this image is 108 pixels by 108 pixels, which is not the right size for our wall. So when we go over here to our main, we're going to load the image. So we're going to duplicate this line and we're going to make this the wall image, and we're going to use the wall image, and then we're going to take that wall image and we're going to resize it. We're just going to say scale the wall image, and the size we want to scale it to is tile size by tile size. Okay, then we can go into our sprites here, and in our wall sprite we can get rid of our green fill, and here we can change this to wall image, and that's going to look a little bit nicer. Yeah, so now our walls are at least something interesting to look at. And now you notice also that we have that layering problem. Some of the walls are drawn above my player, and some of them are drawn below it. I think I would like for them all to be drawn below it. Like, this doesn't look right. Right, so we can set up some layering for that as well. And I think we'll also go over here to the main and, or sorry, we'll go to the settings, and we're going to make the background color something a little nicer. I'm going to put a brown color in here. And by the way, if you're wondering where I got that, where I got those numbers for the color, the RGB for the color, there is a color picker plugin for Atom that's really nice. It'll just go ahead and let you go and grab whatever image, or sorry, whatever color you want, and show you what the RGB is for that, and you can even insert it right into your code. Super handy. So we're just going to make the background color be brown, just so we have a ground. Oh, and then I also wanted to, I'm just going to temporarily comment this out, just in case we want to see the grid again sometime. We can turn that back on so we can make sure, you know, things are working right. But this looks a little better. At least we have a plain background to run around on. All right. Okay, so now we are ready. Let's add some mobs to this game. So we're going to go over to our classes over here, and we're going to add a class mob. Okay, now I'm going to grab, just going to copy some of this code here. All right. Now when we spawn our mob, we're going to, just like we do with everything else, tell it the XY where it's going to be spawned. We're going to add it to a mobs group, and then we need an image, and we have an image for the mob. It comes in the same art pack as the player. It's a little zombie. So we're going to use this little zombie guy. Back over here to our settings. We're going to have a lot of different settings for our mobs. So starting with the mob image, zombie 1 underscore hold.png. That's an underscore. All right. And other stuff that we will put in there later. So our image is going to be mob image. Get rect. And our location is just going to be where we are times tile size. All right, so that's going to be enough to spawn our mob. So let's go over here and make sure we have our, in our new, that we have our mobs group. And we can open up our map, and let's just spawn a mob right here by the player. All right, so we need to load our mob image. So we will just duplicate that. We'll change this to mob image. And we need to say here that when we find an M, when we find a tile with an M in it, we're going to spawn a mob. All right, I think that's everything. Oh, I just realized we forgot one other thing, which is we figured out where we were. We need to put our rectangle there. All right, we just put ourselves at the location, or put the zombie, I should say. All right, so there is our zombie. Okay, ready to chase us around the screen. Now, there's all sorts of ways to get this, that we could decide to have this mob behave, right? Does it chase after the player? Does it walk around randomly? Do we, Pac-Man style, assign a path to it that it's going to walk, that if you can avoid it, you can avoid? There's all sorts of things we can do. And at some point, we'll get to a few of those and talk about how we do them. But to start with, right now, with the time we have left for this video, let's just make the zombie, before we make it move, let's just make it turn and always point at the player. Okay, so that means we want the zombie to rotate. So we're going to give it a rotation value, right? It starts out 0 degrees. It's pointing to the right, just like our player was when it started. All right, and what we need to do is when the mob updates, it needs to see where the player is and figure out what angle it needs to rotate to point at the player. So let's look at a little picture. So let's look at this diagram. So we have a mob and a player. Each sprite has a position vector. That position vector is its location on the screen, right? This position vector is pointing from the origin, right? Because if the mob is at an x of 5 and a y of 1, then he's 5 over and 1 down, right? So this vector is pointing at the mob's location, and the player's position vector is pointing at the player's position. So if we take player position and we subtract mob position, what we get is we will get the vector that connects those two locations. If I had done it the other way around, mob pause minus player pause, then we would have the arrow pointing in this direction. We would find the direction vector from the player to the mob. But this is the one we want, right? We want the vector pointing from the mob to the player. So once we have that direction vector, just by subtracting these two, we have that vector. What we want to know is, what is this angle? What is this angle from the x-axis? Then we know how far to turn our zombie, and as our player moves around, this angle will change and will change how our zombie is facing. So the way we do that is we need to find the angle to the x-axis. And another way to look at the x-axis is it's a vector just pointing in the x direction. So it has an x component and no y component. So the angle between two vectors is very easy to find. There is a vector command to just tell you what it is. You give it two vectors, it tells you what the angle between them is. So we have a way to find out how to point at our player. Okay, so let's just update our angle. Our rotation angle is going to be that direction vector. So the player's position minus our position. Oops, and I just noticed we did not save our game. There we go. All right, so there's our direction vector, right? Player position minus mob position. And now to find out the angle, we take our direction vector and we say dot angle to, and then we say what vector we want to find the angle to. Well, we want to find the angle to that x-axis direction vector, right? And so that will now tell us our angle. And we, just like we did with our player, we can now just rotate. We can just rotate that vector or that image, the mob image, by the rotation vector. We get our new rectangle, and we make sure we update our center of our rectangle to stay at our position. All right, let's try it. So there's my mob. Look, he's pointing at me. And as I move around, he is always going to point at me. Right? So as my player moves, that direction vector is changing. And we're calculating it every frame, which means when I run by him, he's going to turn really fast. But that's okay, because we're going to be running away soon. All right, and now you'll see we could even go into our map and add some more mobs. Let's add a couple more just so that we can see how they are all going to track the player. Oops, I made that one spawn inside the wall because he's centered. Or I'm sorry, he's not centered, but his position is using the corner of the wall, which we'll have to change soon. But there we go. So now you can see how wherever I go, every mob is always chasing me. Very spooky. These are some perceptive zombies. Okay, so we're going to stop there for this video. And in the next video, we can start having the mobs actually move and chase our player around. As always, please hit the like button below. It helps a lot. And subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.